Okay, welcome back to the Modern Revolution. My name is Pete Deely, and I'm glad that you decided to come back for another episode. As you know, with all our fascinating guests and interesting stories, I don't spend any time telling you why you should be interested in the guest or why they're an authority. I instead really encourage you to just deeply listen. And then if you find them to be interesting and intriguing, then we will tell you places that you can learn as much about them as you might like. And my good fortune continues. I have Dr. Matt Zakreski is with us today. And Dr. Matt, thanks for making time for us.
Thank you for setting this up and creating this space. I mean, I get to do a lot of podcasts, but you are the first podcast I've listened to that said, we are just here for the conversation, center yourself, be present. And if you want to Google him, you can Google him later. And I thought, that's somebody I want to talk to. I like your vibe, my friend.
Well,
So
that's very gracious. Thank you. And I think it comes from the world of experts are suspect in
yeah.
forever, but particularly in the last 5 or 6 years. And so I rather people think and listen, first, and then we'll figure out our relationship to it. So with that, so Dr. Matt, for your good work you're doing out in the world, what problem are you tackling? What problem are you trying to improve in the world?
So broadly speaking, the problem I'm trying to solve
Hmm.
is destigmatizing conversations about mental health.
Okay.
And, I mean, obviously, as a psychologist, that's like part of my job. So you think, okay, that makes sense. But I'm trying to take that a step further
Okay.
because when we think about mental health, we tend to think about mental illness,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and I'm going to say everybody has mental health. We
Right.
have good days, we have bad days, we have things that stress us out, we have
Sure.
things that get us so excited,
Hmm.
right? And all of that is the relationship between our brains and our bodies.
Yes.
So I think if we have these conversations in these spaces, somebody's going to listen to this and say, wow, I thought that all mental illness was just depression, anxiety, OCD, but you're telling me that like getting extra half hour sleep a night has major benefits for my brain and body.
Yeah.
That's a thing I'd like to learn more about, right? That's what
Right.
we're trying to do here.
Yeah, and I think what you did for me is kind of locate mental health on a spectrum. Is that there is
Mhm.
mental illness, but there's mental fitness as well,
Yeah.
and that we're all kind of working against the things that might not serve us as well as possible. Some of those things maybe we have different levels to affect. Maybe I mean maybe it's harder to deal with certain types of things, but there are certainly things that we can do to become fitter no matter what's going on with us. So this is such a broad area of health. Um, when you think about improving conversations about mental health, have you circumscribed the conversations to certain types of fitness and illness, or how have you kind of segmented this massive area of conversation into something you can kind of wrestle with?
And to me, it's wrestled. I love your use of the idea of a spectrum, right? Because that's a phraseology I think a lot of people can get behind. And it gets us on this idea of mental illness and mental health challenges are not a sign of weakness,
Right.
right? And I speak to people all over, I'm very blessed in my work that I get to travel the country and talk to schools and organizations from, Springfield, New Jersey to Springfield, Washington, and everything in between,
Hmm.
and this comes up a lot. It's like, well, what's wrong with these people? And I'm like,
Right.
well, you know what? It's a chemical imbalance. It's literally a brain difference,
Yes.
right? I mean, if you have OCD, there's a part of your brain called the basal ganglia. It's a
Hmm.
reward circuit and
Hmm.
it works too well. So your brain goes, oh, this thing it feels like a challenge. I need to complete that challenge. If
Yeah.
I can't calm my body down
Yeah.
and rinse, wash, repeat, right?
Hmm.
So that's that's less a character defect and more of
Yes.
a, oh my goodness, we can target this part of the brain, and on an fMRI, you can see it working too well, right?
Yes. Yes.
But
Right.
then it's like, oh, okay, wait, hold on a second. That's just a brain thing, right?
Right.
So, I mean, I am a huge brain nerd, right? So I like to anchor a lot of the stuff I do in neuropsychology,
Yes.
neurophysiology, and point to parts of our brains that say, for instance, like I'm colorblind, right? I'm
Okay.
super colorblind. You
Okay.
know, that's not me being lazy. Like my art teacher in middle school said, like, you're lazy. I'm like, I literally can't see colors. I'm like a
Right.
golden retriever. You
Yeah,
know?
yeah, yeah.
Right? My rods and cones don't work well. They connect to my optical cortex, which is in the back of my brain, and
Right.
they don't relay that information properly.
Yeah.
So I can't see tonal differences in color. And once I reframe that to people as, hey, and this is just how my brain works, you see those people in the audience going, ah, like, huh,
Right.
right? Those moments
Hmm.
are, that's why we both do what we do, right? To
Sure.
just have that moment of enlightenment.
So one of the things that I'd be curious how you address with your audiences is if the brain is plastic and can be moved in one direction or the other, and there are things present in the brain that maybe work to our discomfort, OCD. So
Mhm.
there may be something that happens that we didn't pick, and it pushes us in uncomfortable directions that don't. Maybe they serve us very well in certain times, right? Like the OCD behavior might show up as a terrifically valuable, like, skill in certain circumstances, and then like an incredible handicap in other circumstances. So it matters like what's going on. So you have these things that are happening at the level of biology, structural, like part, how the person is built,
Yeah.
and then you have the will to what can you control? Because in any circumstance with any level of illness or health, it lies the ability to choose some behavior. So when you look at that spectrum, how do you talk to people about like, yes, but like, okay, it's true you have this, but there's behaviors to mitigate what's bad. Yes, but there are behaviors that accentuate what's good about it. How do you get into that type of conversation?
Yeah. Well, and we use the language of harm reduction,
Okay.
right? So think about, over the last 4+ years, we've been dealing with this COVID pandemic, right?
Yes, yes.
And for a lot of my OCD clients, I mean, they're like, I was prepared for this. I wear a mask. I wash my hands all the time anyway, right? This
I
is
was
my
made for this,
dream.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I've been
right.
training for this my whole life.
Yeah, right.
And it's the sort of thing, like, if you go through the lens of harm reduction,
Yes.
everything we try to do is about trying to protect our brains and bodies,
Mhm,
right? So if you go to a networking event, right, and you're nervous because you don't like to do networking events, so you have a couple of cocktails before you go to the networking event,
mhm.
that is a coping strategy, right?
Right,
It's a way to manage the big feelings that come with networking.
right,
And then maybe you've had so much to drink that you embarrass yourself, right?
right,
It's like, okay, well, gosh, well, okay, a drink is okay. Maybe two drinks is okay, but 7 beers and a shot of vodka is probably too much, right?
right, right.
If you can reframe things as we're all just trying to survive in the world and there are healthier ways to survive the world,
Yes.
then what it does is it creates what I like to call bottom up thinking,
Okay,
right? As humans, we tend to do top-down thinking. So think about taking a test, right?
okay.
You know, so Peter, if I was like, hey, you took a history test, you got 94 on that test, how would you feel about that grade?
94 sounds excellent to me.
Yeah, right. Solid, right? And for a lot of the kids I work with, a 94 is catastrophic,
Okay.
right? Because they
Yeah,
see it and do top-down thinking. They think I got two questions wrong.
right,
100 goes to 97, 97 goes not to 94, right?
right.
That's top-down thinking. I want it to be perfect. Anything less than that is bad.
Okay.
Bottom up thinking, it says the default setting to anything is 0. I didn't even show up to the test. I didn't even try to take the test.
Right, right.
Ergo, 0.
Yeah,
Everything I did on that test moves me higher and higher up the staircase towards the goal of getting 100,
right,
right? So on something more nebulous and personal like mental health, you know, your default is I do absolutely nothing and let my brain run wild.
right.
Everything I do, from having a glass of water to trying to get some sleep to reaching out to a friend
Yeah.
to, going outside to seeing a therapist to taking your meds to da 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 da, you climb this ladder towards this sort of nebulous goal of, that's where the top is. That's where health looks like.
Okay.
So I say to my kids, my ADHD kids are chewing gum in class. And they're
Okay.
like, I can't stop that. I'm like, you're actually trying to regulate yourself. Gum is a very sensory regulatory thing,
Makes sense.
right? It's got chewing, which moves your body, saliva, which is stimulating your mouth, and gives your brain something to focus on. It's it's an organic coping strategy,
Right.
right? One of the things I like to say, things are therapeutic
Mhm.
without being therapy, right? No therapist is going to say, hey, you know what, you should try and chew some gum.
Right, right.
Gum can be therapeutic.
Mhm.
And then we establish that as you are doing a thing to take care of yourself, then we maybe move from that to, a fidget spinner, or you go from that to a fidget toy that you can twist with your fingers, something that isn't quite so
Sure, sure.
fun
Right.
can be, right? So what we're doing is we're moving somebody inexorably towards healthier choices, reducing the harm that can come with some of the maladaptive choices we make.
Yeah, I mean, and so there's such a complex set of considerations in that, right? Because you have the individual's need to ameliorate the things that are hurting them. So we
Mhm.
harm reduction there, but that individual sits in the context of the community, so a classroom, and the person next to them has their right to learn in a way that's, undistracted or whatever. And so having to have this conversation seems like there's a lot of complexity and subtlety, particularly if your conversations are with kids. And so, like, how do you navigate the sense of framing things properly and then framing things improperly? Because if a kid was like, listen, Dr. Matt, you told me to start at zero. The fact that I went crazy in class today, I was at class, so I'm better than zero, like, and that could be used as a tactic in my mind of somebody who's like trying to manipulate the conversation rather than take the essence of what you're trying to give them. So when you get into these conversations, what are maybe some pitfalls that come along with it? I mean, is that a fair question to ask you? I mean,
Oh, it's absolutely. Listen, with me, there's no questions out of bounds because it's all part of these conversations.
yeah,
But
yeah,
what you're showing is a natural response to the thing I'm talking about. There's this sort of unspoken shadow concern that exists. Like, well, if we give into this, are the
yeah,
inmates running
yeah,
wild, right? And that
yeah,
it's a reasonable question.
yeah, yeah. Thank you for
You
saying
know,
that. Yeah,
Oh, absolutely. I mean, absolutely. Like, listen, I am aggressively pragmatic. I'm like, it's got to work. And it
right,
can't just work for my kiddo. I have a kiddo who, if it was up to him, he'd kick everybody else out of his middle school and he would
right.
just sit there and learn by himself.
Yeah, yeah,
It would make his brain happy, it would make his social anxiety happy.
right,
And I tell him all the time, like, yeah, buddy, unless you want to be homeschooled, that's not an option for you,
right, right,
right? You've got to figure out how to navigate this. And yes, it's also hard, right?
right.
Both things can be true.
Yes, yes,
So what almost what we just talked about is called dialectic thinking, or
right.
holding two different thoughts in your head at your same time, right?
Yes,
I can love myself and think I'm a screw up,
right,
right?
right, right.
For most kids, they only hear the part I'm a screw up,
Sure,
right? Or they whip back to the other thing. It's like, I'm perfect, I'm lovely, I'm wonderful. I've never made a mistake in my whole life,
right,
you know, and it's painful to stay on either pole because
right.
neither of them are totally true.
Sure.
It takes a lot of mental discipline to be able to hold both thoughts and say,
Yeah,
yeah, I'm a good husband and father, and sometimes I lose my temper and I yell. I don't want to yell at my wife or kids, right? But I'm a
right.
human being, right?
Sure,
And
sure.
I've got my buttons like everybody else,
Right.
you know, and that steps directly into the next phase of this plan, which is my bedrock rule of therapy is
Okay.
you are allowed to feel however you want about whatever you want. That's
Right.
your right as a human being,
Right.
but it's what you do with those feelings that
Yeah.
matter.
Yeah. Sure.
So,
I have a daughter and she's a equine therapist, so she uses
oh,
horses to
that's so
work with,
cool.
yeah, she works with kids that have been through traumatic portions of their life. And what is among the more fascinating things about observing her is the horses become almost the voices of the kids because they don't have the language to talk about it. So when you talk about you're allowed to feel whatever you want to feel, I think for many people, never mind children, how to turn that into like language is not easy, right? And I think
Mhm.
what you said at the beginning is like your life's work is to create conversations about mental health. And that's one thing if it's a meta conversation, like we're talking about, okay, like that. It's another thing if like your own mental health. You're like, you have to have a self-awareness, and then the ability to express that in language that people can understand, which is not always easy, right? And so for the kids with her, the horses become like a vehicle by which uh, the horse, in a certain sense, explains when in their life something bad might have happened. There's all these kind of interesting things. For you, as you decided to place your energy in this field, did you come to the decision to pursue this in an epiphany, or did it come to you sort of incrementally, step at a time over the years?
So I'm going to give a very psychologist answer and say
Okay.
both.
Okay.
Uh, but so I grew up in a house where both of my parents are clinical psychologists.
Okay.
Very unusual, right? Two doctor households are weird, or it was a rare, not weird. Well, they are weird too, but they're very rare.
Right. Right.
And the fact that both of my parents were mental health professionals.
Wow.
So I grew up with this stuff. This was what we talked about around the dinner table.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was, I never got grounded as a kid. I I certainly was made to feel the things, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
Right. Yeah.
you know, what feelings are you enacting? It's like, just ground me. Right? Uh,
Yeah.
um, but as I moved through my career, I was like, I can't imagine doing this work. So I bounced around. I was a bartender for a while. I sold travel. I worked in a lab. And then I had this moment where I was, my friends and I, at this company in Boston we worked at, the company sponsored a little league team.
Okay.
And we all just after work, we would go down and we would coach the little league team. And watching these kids, watching them bounce off each other, coming from a rough part of Boston,
Right.
just that they needed a human to bear witness to their
R-
stories, right?
Nice. Yes.
Thinking to myself, well, hot damn, I can do that,
Right.
right? Like,
Right.
so I quit my job. I moved to Philly. I got a job working in mental health, and I mean, that's the so it was a lots of steps that led to an epiphany, right?
Okay. Right.
I
Right.
think I had to find my own way to it, right?
Yes.
And that was, and that's how I've made it my own.
When I mean, you have your practice as you're doing the work of that, but when you think about it at the macro level, when you're doing maybe presentations to groups and you're talking about it, what types of status quo issues present themselves where somebody would go like, "Hey, listen, this is just this. We don't need this." Like, what things are you up against to kind of um, when you're hearing people who are not understanding why this is as important of an issue as it in fact is? Like, what is that status quo disposition out there?
So I take that question through the lens of what we call neurodiversity,
Okay.
right? The world is built for neurotypical people, people with regular brains, right?
Yes. Yes.
Somewhere around 70% of people are neurotypical, right?
Right.
But when you are on the outside of that 70%, whether you have a very high IQ, like you're gifted, or very
Right.
low IQ, like you're learning disabled, or
Right.
you have ADHD, OCD, dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyspraxia, there's a lot of things that we know now are
Yeah.
literal brain differences, right?
Right.
So what I tell people is like, listen, the world is built for the masses, and there are a lot more of them than there are of us, right? And I say us because I'm a gifted person. I also have ADHD. As I mentioned, I'm
Right.
also colorblind. I'm a whole bunch of neurodivergent up here. It's super
Yeah.
fun,
Yeah.
right? And it's the thing, getting back to what we said before, like your neurodivergence makes you different. It doesn't
Right.
make you better or worse than anybody else, but does make
Sure.
you different.
Yes.
Those differences are worthy of appropriate accommodations. They're also not an excuse, right? So when
Yeah.
my kids
Yeah.
are like, well, I have ADHD, I can't help but cheat on a test. I'm like, you absolutely can help cheating
Right.
on a test. That's
Yes.
against the rules,
Right.
right? We may need to make accommodations that make it harder for you to cheat on a test
Yes.
because of your impulsivity, because of all that other stuff.
Okay.
But you don't get a get out of jail free card because you're ADHD, right?
Yeah.
It
Right.
doesn't work that way. So that's how I find that middle ground between you can feel however you want to feel, but what you do with it matters.
Yes.
Because it's too easy to pretend ADHD is not real. It's also too easy to say, well, if they have ADHD, they can't be held to the same standards.
Yes.
Personally, I think that's a load of nonsense, right?
Right.
I hold every one of my clients to a very high standard. it's
Yes.
a realistic standard based on, you know,
Right.
based on an informed idea of who they are and what they want to accomplish,
Sure.
right?
Yeah. I mean, when I think about the pop psychology environment, I don't mean pop psychology meaning like psychology today, but I mean like the impulses in the society about our relationship to our own mental health, our own well-being. And I think of, and this will display sort of like where I consume information, all the rest of it. Like there's David Goggins, of like there's no room for anything that speaks to your inability to do anything, and that anything that kind of takes you away from his stay hard mentality of um, every day is has to consist of things that are suck and so on and so forth. And then on the other end, the sort of permissiveness that's like we're only at the mercy of the construct of our atoms, like we are who we are, and we can't be held accountable for those two things feel to me. And I'm 53, so I'm neither young nor old, I would say at this point. I mean, I'm truly middle aged, right? That when I think about where that needle has fallen over time, it almost feels like there isn't a dominant side of that equation. That instead, there's, like many things, like a fracturing to the extremes
Oh,
in the
yes.
society, which in my mind doesn't give room for a lot of wisdom, because now you're either committed to the David Goggins perspective of like, I don't have any sympathy for you because everything's under your control, and that's that. And there's like that perspective, and it has its place in some senses, and then this other perspective. So when you're out there sort of encouraging this dialectic thinking and encouraging conversation, why don't people realize it's as serious as it is? Like what about the current environment makes it we're like, oh,
Yeah. I think it's because as human beings, we're really good at what I like to call macro empathy, right? You
yes,
know, you find out your neighbor's house burned down. Peter, what's the first thing you do?
the neighbor's house is burned down.
Yeah,
Well, we run to the neighbor's aid, right? We do our best to
right.
help the neighbor.
Immediately, right?
Right. Yes, yes.
You find out that your neighbor might lose his job. What do you do?
Well, I mean, I like to think we're over there again, right?
Yeah.
Being helpful, helping, to the extent we can.
It's a harder question, right? It doesn't have a as tangible as a thing, right?
Yes,
So because so much of mental illness is subtle and gradual and happens behind closed doors,
right.
people don't know how to respond to it.
Yes,
I mean, I over the holidays I had a stomach bug. Everybody's like, "You okay? You okay? Can I bring you,
right,
some
right,
soup?"
right. Yeah,
Like
yeah,
taking care of the kids. I'm like, "Bless you. Thank you so much for helping me."
yes,
If I have a bad depression day, people are like,
yes, yeah, right, right, right.
and so it's like, listen, I respect a lot of what David Goggins says, and I think more is in our control than we like to think or we're
Yeah,
told to think. But there are elements of it, I mean, the one of the big questions in psychology has always been nature or
sure.
nurture,
Right,
right?
right,
Is it biology or is it socialization, right? And the
right.
research overwhelmingly shows it's both,
Sure.
right?
Right,
I can't fix my prefrontal cortex, right? I can't give myself not ADHD,
right.
but the brain is plastic. The more I work at it, the more I practice it, the more I do my deep breathing, my meditation, my own therapy, I can feel my brain get stronger, right? It's a
Yes,
muscle,
yes.
right? I'm never going to run an ultra marathon, right? That's not my journey. That's not my path.
Right.
But I can run a 5K,
Sure.
and that's totally aligned with what a controlling the parts of this that I can control.
Yes.
And what we see in people is that if you help them, if you help them aim at goals that are reasonable for them, that are aligned with their values, their wants, their version of their own future,
Right.
they're much more likely to organically want to take the next step,
Yes.
right? If you say you run a marathon or you're a quitter, I'm never going to run that marathon. I'm going to fight you. If
Right,
you
right.
say run to the end of the block and back, there's a better chance I'm going to want to run around the block.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then
yeah.
I'm going to run a mile, then a 5K, then ba 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 ba.
Sure, sure.
Right. So that's the
Yeah.
growth curve we're looking at here.
Yeah, I would so I'd like to I'll give you two ends of a perspective, and I'd like for you to talk a little bit, like talk about these two stories. So one story is me listening to a podcast, and it's about a kid with schizophrenia, and the kid is, and I don't understand schizophrenia well, so let me not overstep. But as I listened to the podcast, it talked about that it presents early 20s, late teens, and
Mhm.
this kid goes very rapidly from uh, an upset kid to homicidal, and he kills the family.
Yep.
So that's a type of mental illness that is um, when trying to have the wisdom of like what is something incremental you can do, and then what is something that needs an extreme intervention is to me less obvious than it sometimes. So let me tell you the second story. The second story is I have a nephew, and the
Mhm.
nephew committed suicide about 14 months ago.
Oh,
And
I'm so
it
sorry.
is it is beyond my ability to express how painful the experience is. It is a devastating part of my family's and the circumstances and all the rest of it are dramatic beyond my willingness to talk about like how it all happened. However, I bring it up because when you talk about harm reduction and when I think of the good work you're doing in the world, there are what I consider to be the inconveniences of, okay, we have a school setting and we want to make sure everybody's treated well, like in terms of learning and no one's distracted, and we have like someone's acting out. And then there's this other sort of part of the conversation, which is if something is super serious, how do you even recognize it and get into the conversation? Because to talk to my nephew, his ability to express what was going on with him was compromised by his mental illness. And he wasn't
Absolutely.
trustworthy. He wasn't
Right.
trustworthy to tell you what was going on with him. He was resistant to
Yeah.
lots and lots of things we kind of. So I guess what I'm asking you in those kind of things is that when we talk about mental illness, there's this element of harm reduction that improves people's lives. But I also think that we may underappreciate the number of people who are killing themselves and going through sort of a type of mental illness that's destructive, not just
Yeah.
inconvenient. So could you talk a little bit about like how should we think about it? Because I don't really know even how I think about it, having been through what I've been through.
Well, and I'll tell you this, I do a lot of work with the suicide community.
Okay.
I went down and spoke at a big teen suicide conference this past fall down in Dallas. This is Grant Halliburton Foundation. They do amazing work.
Okay.
Actually, earlier today, I had a conference call with my colleague Julie at the Non-Zero Foundation. Their goal is to stop teen suicide in particular, right?
Okay. Right.
And the fact of the matter is, I'm going to gather my thoughts. The fact of the matter is, we don't know nearly enough
Hmm.
to give hard answers, right? And
Yeah.
that sounds such a cop out, right?
No, it
But
doesn't actually.
right,
Sounds
but
honest.
it's hard. Well, and I mean, listen, for better or worse, you'll always know where you stand with me because I'm always honest.
Right.
I can tell you stuff about the brain when it comes to schizophrenia, right?
Hmm.
We know a little bit about that. Suicide has proven to be a remarkably difficult thing to study because of the nature of it as a mental illness, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Your nephew was unreliable. I can't tell you how many therapy sessions I've been in where the kid is swearing up and down that they're fine, and I look at their face and you can tell they're on a precipice,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And this is where there are three levels of intervention we've got to think about.
Okay.
The first is macro level society stuff, which is what I'm trying to do here talking to you,
Right.
is in is is talk about this stuff, make it open,
Right.
right? In one study that I cite this all the time, people are 371 more percent more likely to mention a chronic physical illness, even
Sure.
if it's embarrassing. So in this case, hemorrhoids. People were
Right. Right.
371 times more percent more likely to mention hemorrhoids than
Hmm.
they were when they were depressed,
Yeah.
right? And that's, I mean, you said you're 53, right? I'm
Yeah.
40. Like hemorrhoids are are part of our lives as mentally trend, right? And like, and it's the sort of thing like, why is it that we feel as from a societal level that
Right.
we cannot have these conversations? Because it puts people in closed doors.
Yeah.
The second thing is that no mental health intervention is complete without community, without connection.
Yeah.
Suicide as a phenomenon it's a disorder of connection,
Okay.
right? We find people who feel like they don't fit into the world. They don't feel like they fit into schools or work or traditional family structures, or they don't feel like they fit their bodies. They don't feel like they fit, the dating pool. I mean, there's a lot of reasons, but it
Sure.
almost always comes back down to I don't feel connected to the things that fuel me, that you're going to fuel my soul,
Right.
right? And that's why, I mean, getting back to this idea of things that are therapeutic without being therapy, I had a client I worked with a couple years ago, they were at prep school, they were far away, very suicidal. And I
Hmm.
called their parents, I said, go get this kid,
Yeah.
go
Right.
get in the
Right.
car, drive to them.
Yeah.
And they're like, but what about school? I'm like, I can't help your kid if they're dead.
Right.
Like,
Right.
I don't care if they fail chemistry. I
Right. Right.
don't,
Yeah.
right?
We can take chemistry later.
We, right? And this kid was brilliant, 174 IQ, right?
Wow.
Like,
Oh my God.
I was like, I can teach this kid chemistry, right? This kid will learn chemistry in 3 weeks.
Yeah.
But
Right.
if they aren't with us anymore, then I can't help them.
Yeah.
And and I remember this for lots of reasons, but one of it was just dad told dad told the his boss that he was having surgery.
Oh. Oh.
Not
How
that I'm
interesting.
driving across
Yeah.
the country to save my son who's suicidal.
Yeah.
And I told him, like, Dad, we're gonna talk about that later, right? We're gonna circle back to that idea. Go get
Yes.
your kid, right? And then we get to the idea of what what does good therapy look like?
Hmm.
And and it's the sort of thing that it's so hard to do this. I was talking about this actually with a client today, because if I'm a medical doctor, right, and I take a blood draw, it's going to show me you have diabetes or not, right? I don't
Right.
need your to
That's right.
diagnose
Yeah.
diabetes, right? But if I'm your therapist, I need to create an environment where you feel comfortable to share those darkest, toughest, scariest parts of yourself
Right.
so I can help you. I say to my clients all the time, my ability to help you is directly related to how honest you are with me.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing, you didn't have to share what you shared about your nephew, and that was brave and vulnerable and
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
You didn't have to do that,
Yeah.
right? But I feel more connected to you, and hopefully you feel more heard and seen by me.
Yeah. And I think the reason why I mention it and the reason why I bring it up is that I think I think we agree in terms of like the medical care that he got and the examination of his journals that he was a schizophrenic that he was schizophrenic. And so I believe that he was dangerous to other people and that in some senses I think he mitigated the potential danger that he could be to other people. Like suicide was I think he was thoughtful about his decision. I don't think it was just the impulse of the moment. I think it was an aggregate of experiences that he felt. For him, if it wasn't a lack of connection, it was a lack of control because he was hearing voices. Those voices were, it was very difficult to fight with. So when we talk about reducing the stigma of the conversation with it with about mental fitness and mental illness, the ability to create the opportunity for parents that are dealing with things, people who are dealing with their loved ones, to think about it across the entire spectrum, I think is important. But I think it's hard because I think you need wisdom. Like it's not just knowledge. I think you need a certain amount of wisdom to know like where are these boundaries between control and uncontrollable behavior. Does pharmaceuticals have a role or don't have a role? Like all of those things to me are not easy um, conversations. But the consequences when you bring up the notion of like harm reduction, that harm reduction is both to the patient and to the community that the patient lives within. And both have to, I think, be considered, which is just that's complicated. It's a hard thing to do, I think.
Immensely, immensely
Yeah,
complicated. I mean, the question of pharmaceuticals, right? I mean, I'm not a psychiatrist. I cannot prescribe medication.
Right.
I have seen medication change kids' lives, right?
Yeah.
I have seen
Right.
it bring their personality back. I've seen them focus, and I've seen medications do nothing, and I've
Right.
seen medications make kids worse, right?
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
seen all three. And when people ask me, how do I feel about meds? I say, they're not for everybody, pause, but they're for most people,
Hmm.
right? We know a lot about this stuff. We're good at it. And the question is, are you willing to take that leap? And it's a big leap. It's a big leap for a lot of families.
Yes.
And all you have to do is punch in Prozac to Google,
Sure.
and you're going to get 1,000 horror stories, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right.
I took Prozac and I turned green and grew a third arm. And it's like, well, that's not even possible, right? But it's out there,
Yeah.
you know. And it's a thing, I actually like to call it the restaurant rule, right? You go to a restaurant, they cook your burger well, they give you a soda, the game's on, you tell maybe one person, two people.
Right.
You go
Right.
to a restaurant
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you order
Yeah.
chicken and it's bloody, and there's
Yeah.
glass in your soda, right? You're gonna tell everybody right?
For sure.
So, right, it's a delicate balance and it's a tool in the arsenal. I wouldn't recommend anybody just do medication, just like the answer is therapy is helpful, medication is helpful. Research shows meds plus therapy together is the best outcome,
Right.
right? And we tie that into community supports, the right kind of school, the right kind of job, you know, parents, like, hiring somebody to maybe clean your house, or hiring somebody to help with the groceries or be a mother's helper. Those sort of systemic community supports
Right.
can move us from the dangerous red line a little bit more to like a manageable level.
Right.
And every single one of those things, when added together, creates that snowball of positivity, right? It's like, okay, hiring somebody to do the grocery shopping for me twice a week, that's not therapy, but you're damn right it's therapeutic, right?
Yeah.
And
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that the some of the slipperiest places are where the boundaries of knowledge and wisdom, information and the analysis of the information, all of those like different things. We have data, but that data doesn't always tell a story. We might have boundaries, but there are exceptions to every rule. Like those things are all when it comes to this topic, I think so tricky. If the dad loves his son so deeply and is going to rescue the son from a potentially dangerous situation, but can't express that in the community, like this is what I'm doing, that when the work you're doing to me is opening up the notion of like, no, we're prioritizing, this in a way that this is there's heroicness to the conversation. It's that we don't almost want to just normalize it. We want to say it is actually the bravest kind of road in many instances, and then to figure that out against the times when those people are manipulative, which kind of muddies the water. Where like, well, they want to be. I want you to think of me as brave, and they're manufacturing things. So my experience with my nephew was like the very complicated experience of watching somebody who was ill beyond an ordinary illness, and it wasn't like we're just going to eat vegetables, do therapy, and like there was something very deeply wrong. But his behavior had all of these things that were chosen too, like he was manipulative consciously too, like he was doing things that were just poorly, that I don't know that we could purely blame the illness for. So not to turn this into a therapy session about me, I mentioned those things purely because I think the work you're doing, those type of conversations have been things that have been suppressed, and it feels to me like the consequences of the suppression are accelerating, not that there's more problems from it than there were in the past. To the extent that that's true or not, I don't know. It just feels like it to me. Suicide in particular for teens feels like a bigger issue now than it's been in the past. I don't have any information to like shore that up. It just seems like it is.
well, I mean, the rates are significantly higher, right? And part of this is what we call the comparison effect,
Okay.
right? I mean, I grew up in a small town in New Jersey, right? I knew everybody in my town. I
Right.
didn't know a lot of people other places in New Jersey,
Right.
right? But now in 2024, I got it right this time, is that all I do is pick up my phone and I can see anybody on planet Earth,
Right.
right? So what we're seeing is, there is this comparison effect that everybody's doing better than me.
Sure.
I feel bad, I feel alone, I feel disconnected, you know, and we tie that in with the increased pressures and increased demands on today's kids. I mean, do you know, this is just a wild statistic, right? Do you know the percentage by which recess has declined over the last 30 years?
No, I don't.
94%.
How interesting. We've taken
Right.
recess out of the picture,
Taking
huh?
recess away, right? Kids who need to move their bodies and run and play
Sure.
are not being able to do so. And we're wondering why kids aren't making social connections. They
Right.
don't have because they don't have resiliency skills. You learn that stuff on the playground. Now,
Yeah.
what I do can amplify that, can make those kids more successful.
Sure.
But then we're sending them into the pressure cooker that is middle school, the cooker that is high school, with limited skills, with more pressure. There's nowhere to escape.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when you hear kids who are 13 who are like, if I fail the Spanish test, I'm never going to get into Harvard. It's like, that's not how that works.
Right. Right.
Nobody doesn't get into Harvard because they failed the Spanish test in seventh grade.
Right.
That's the narrative these kids are getting.
Yeah.
And it's sort of, it's like it's like, who's going to race off the cliff faster? Like,
Sure.
when people ask me, like, what would you do for schools? I'm like, you bring back recess, you bring back
Hmm.
shop, you bring back auto shop, you bring back home ec, you bring back theater, you bring back the arts,
Right.
right? And you tell kids you cannot take AP classes before junior year,
Right. Right.
right? Unless
Yeah.
it's an extreme circumstance, like unless you can show us that you've done the work. Because what you see is kids who are not doing soccer, lacrosse,
Right.
snowshoeing, they're not doing video games. They
Yeah.
are going to Human. They are going to their tutors. They're going to their extracurriculars.
Yeah.
And then parents are like, they spend too much time on their phones. It's like, it's the only release valve they have.
Sure.
You've got to give people, and not just kids, people time to relax, decompress.
Right.
You No one can be on all the time because sooner or later that bill comes due.
Right. And that sort of relentlessness is something that I feel is part of all of our lives, but for the kids. And when I say relentlessness, this is what I mean. For example, like I have a niece who's in high school and she's had a lot of people be mean to her. And when I say that they've been mean to her, I mean they've told her, you should go kill yourself. We're gonna beat you up after school. So that type of meanness, one thing that I look at her experience compared to other kid like me growing up is that if I got home after being like in a quarrel with kid, I was home and it stopped. But now, like when you talk about connection, like when the connections are bad, they also don't stop, right? So like now this kid's dealing with kids that are in those circumstances, they're dealing with it as every time they look at the phone because of all these different ways that people can message them. So it's such an awkward I think time to figure out what's the right amount of connection, what's the right type of connection, how much can you what governors do we really have? Like if the kid's going to have a phone, do you really have a way to kind of keep them? And then if not, really all you can do is equip the kid with the skills as best you can. um, but those complexities, when we talk about skyrocketing suicide rates, like what are the underpinning things? That feels a little bit like there's no space. If a kid's tortured, they can't ever get away from it. I don't know that I'm over dramatizing it, but that's what it seems like to me.
Oh, and it absolutely is. I mean, I mean, I was horribly bullied in eighth grade,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
And the only thing that I had going for me at that time in human history was it
Right.
was right before the social media era,
Okay.
right? When I left school, I was free.
You got a
I,
break. Yeah.
right, 'cause, I mean, this was we'll date ourselves a little bit, but this age where if you want to talk to them, you have to call their house.
Sure.
And they like your mom will be like, hello. It's like, hi, Miss Zakreski, can I talk to Matt? They like to bully him more. And it's like, I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, yeah.
you know, but I've got kids now who are like, oh my gosh, people create fake Google phone numbers and they
Oh,
just spam,
yeah.
right?
God.
And there are, you can write an easy code to spam somebody's inbox with messages like kill yourself, right?
Yeah,
It's not hard. And so that kind of bullying, that psychological torture, it never really lets up.
right.
And so our kids feel hopeless, right? The three biggest predictors of suicide are hopeless, helpless, and worthless. Those are the big
Mm,
three.
okay.
Right? And I cannot tell you how many kids I talk to these days who feel hopeless.
Yeah,
It's never going to get better.
right.
Why should I try? And, I mean, you look outside, you read the news, it's like, okay, there's a lot of bad headlines. No, there's hope out there. We're going to find it. Right. And that's why, you know, anchoring somebody to a community that supports them and loves them.
Yeah,
For some people that's a religion. Some people it's musical
sure.
theater. Some people it's cross country. For some people it's the military. You know, what I tell parents is like throw it against the wall and see what sticks.
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah. Yeah, how
And
do you find your tribe?
right, you got to find your tribe. And like
Yeah,
I was, talking to a dad, this well now it's a couple years ago. Guy, big high school football star. Like his name's on a building, right? And his son, he's a gifted kid. All he wanted to do in life, right, was to be on the chess team. And
right.
he wanted to do, choir and chess and
Yeah, yeah.
glee and all these other things. And dad was like, well, I mean, he's gonna get beat up in high school. He's gonna play football. It's like he doesn't want to play football.
Right,
Like that's actually going to put him at more risk.
right.
But if he plays with the chess kids, yes, he will be made fun of for playing chess. I cannot tell you otherwise. But it's the wildebeest alone on the savannah that gets
Yeah.
picked off. The wildebeest in a herd of wildebeests is
Yeah,
safe.
yeah, yeah, that's yeah, I mean, finding a tribe is not an easy process, and if someone's pushing you against your own instincts and your own thing, that it just, it's all the more harder if you're having to fight that battle, is what say. Well, let's say someone's listening and they're thinking about their own mental health, they're thinking about, like, what might be something that, um, in terms of the work you're doing, either you would say, "Hey, consider this in terms of the maintenance of your own mental health," or, you know, maybe in their community of family and loved ones, they have people that they're in conversation with about their mental health. What might be something you could suggest to either or both of those people that they think about, as we kind of head to the end of the podcast?
Well, the first is, and please take me at my word with this, is that there's nothing shameful about therapy.
Hmm.
There's nothing
Yes.
shameful
Yes.
about talking to somebody. And, I mean, you can do it online, you can do it via text, you can do it in person. There are coaches, there are counselors and clinicians and therapists and psychologists. There
Right.
are more options now than there have ever have been and more ways to get them,
Yeah.
you know, and that is a beautiful thing.
Right.
One of the kids I work with, he's like, listen, can we just pay you once a week for me to be able to text you when I need you? I'm like, absolutely.
Hmm.
Right?
Hmm.
Because it's 2024 and we have the technology.
Right.
And I know he's having a tough week when he wants to actually talk to me on the phone, right?
Right. Right. Yeah.
Most of the time, he sends me a couple of texts. I send him a couple of texts. We're chilling, right?
Right.
So no shame in therapy.
Right.
Second thing is if therapy doesn't feel possible or practical right now,
Hmm.
it's okay to pull back on things and reset.
Yeah.
You can
Yes.
take a medical leave from school or work. You can you can return to a safe place and heal, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because to go back to David Goggins, right? It's like, you can't run an ultra marathon on a broken ankle. At some
Right.
point, you've got to stop and let the ankle
Yes.
heal, right?
Yes.
Um, so and parents are like, well, we've got to keep going. It's like you actually really don't,
Right.
right? Treat a bad mental health day like you have a bad cold.
Sure.
Fluids, rest, Netflix, right? Like that's
Yeah.
actually how we heal. Like you've got to treat it the same way. And then that segues beautifully into thing. And I actually will happily share this with you, and we can share this out in the show notes. Um, so there's a protocol called SEEDS, SEEDS,
Okay.
and it's the 5 things that predict better mental health in people that aren't therapy. right?
Okay.
And it's for sleep, education,
Mm,
exercise, diet, and socializing.
nice.
Right? So it's sort of set yourself a goal for each one of those things for the week. I want to sleep an extra hour this week.
Yeah,
Whenever I do, I can do that, right? I'm going to call my best friend from high school and say, what the hey, what's going on?
sure.
I'm going to eat an apple. I'm going to drink a glass of water. I'm going to, instead of parking right next to my building, I'm going to park at the other end of the parking lot and walk that extra 100 steps. Like,
Right.
and all those things individually feel like drops in the bucket, but then you look up and you've got 5 drops in the bucket.
That's right.
And that makes it easier to do 10 drops, 30
Yes.
drops, 100 drops, right?
Yes.
Well, you know what? Your bucket's half full. And the cool thing about that is it doesn't require the emotional or financial commitment that therapy does.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I wish therapy was for everybody,
Right.
right? But it's hard to do,
Sure.
and hard to find, but everybody can do seeds,
Yeah.
right? So that's
Yes.
a
Yes.
right. And that's a thing that I tell a lot of my clients. It's like, hey, listen, if you can't do therapy right now for whatever reason,
Right.
here's a sheet, set yourself a goal, follow up, well, I'll be your accountability buddy, right?
Right.
And
Right.
then
Yeah.
and we turn that from 1 to 2 to 10 to 30 to 100,
Right.
and people feel better, so they do better, which
Yeah.
makes them feel better, which helps them do better. It becomes a virtuous cycle
Sure.
rather than vicious cycles that we've been unfortunately talking about today.
Yeah, yes. Well, I'm encouraged. I mean, I'm encouraged that you're out there in the world doing the things you're doing because it's important. And I think that I feel like the work you're doing is more important now than like other times in history. It feels critical that we get into these conversations. So I appreciate your disposition of calmness. Your sense of like, hey, a gentle approach to things that also has boundaries. So it's not so gentle that we're like we don't have expectations. We have expectations in the context of some informed, realistic kind of, what are the guardrails to what works here and what doesn't. I think that if you're listening, seed sounds like something that anybody can do to some degree wherever you are at any circumstance in your situation. How much are you sleeping? Are you getting exercise? Do you know about that? Are you connected? Is your diet proper? Um, those are all things that all of us don't have to be doctors, that we can take a look at our life and do good work with ourselves or our kids or whoever else might be connected to us. So I'm very grateful, Dr. Matt. Thank you for telling us what you told us today and spending some time with us.
I mean, it was a treat, and I mean, your presence and vulnerability within this podcast space allows me to share what I shared, right? I mean,
Yeah, thank you.
we co-created something special, and
I
I think
agree.
that's wonderful, right? So,
Yeah.
keep doing the great work you're doing, sir, and it's a treat to get to talk to you.
Oh, that's generous. Thank you. Well, today's modern revolutionary, Dr. Matt, he's bringing a lot of great information to us. But one of the things I'd like for you also to hear, besides just the information, is that he's bravely stepping out to talk about things that are important to you. He's doing good work in the world, and he's letting us know about it. And I hope that that encourages you to take things that you're passionate about and that you bring your thoughts, ideas, passion to the world because the modern revolution needs us all.